by a simple show of hands, how many of us here today want success? Okay, great. Everyone in the room. Now, by a simple show of hands, how many of us here want failure? Not as many hands go up. But what if I told you that success is actually equal to failure? That your failures are the only way that you will actually accomplish any sort of success in your life. Think about it. Does this logo remind you of anyone? Michael Jordan, one of the greatest basketball players of all time, was not good enough for his high school basketball team. What about this logo? Walt Disney, fired from a newspaper because he lacked creativity. And look at Disney and where it is now. And what about this one? Imagine being a book author and getting rejected by 12 different major publishers. And you end up writing Harry Potter. Now, I know that all of these examples are everywhere. You know them, you've heard them all, and you feel disconnected because you think, hey, that's them, they're exceptions. I don't know these people. And that's exactly why I'm here to share my story with you. Now, quick disclaimer, I'm not here to brag, but I sat in that exact same seat you're sitting in today. And I want to share my story because if I can empower and change the perspective of even one of you, then I would consider this whole thing a big success for me. No facial hair. This is me as a Westminster School student. Now, I couldn't find pictures of me back in grade 5, but back then, I was a completely different person. Shy, never tried public speaking, sat in corners of the classes, and all I really wanted to do was just go out for PE. It was only until the first time that one of my teachers recommended me to try being a class president. And now I know many of you here might be class presidents, but it was that first initial step that really started to help me on my journey towards where I am today. And pay close attention to this because as my story goes, you'll really understand the butterfly effect of how such a small change can really have a huge impact moving forward. So being class president in grade 5 and then grade 6, not a big deal. But then the next opportunity was speaking on stage, this exact stage. And I still remember standing at a podium in that corner, hiding behind the podium with a piece of paper, reading out of it, and shaking the entire time. That was the first time I tried public speaking. And to many, looking from the outside, you might have considered it a failure because it wasn't engaging. I didn't feel like I delivered my message, but it was the first step. It was the first time I failed at public speaking. And after that, I did so many different assemblies. I spoke in so many different events. And quickly, I started realizing, okay, every time I fail at something, I learn something else. And then when I apply that, I start getting better. And it wasn't just public speaking. It was literally everything that I did in this school. Fast forward a few years, and it's grade 10. You're applying to become a member of the student council. And my eyes, to be honest, were only on the sports positions because I loved football, and I just wanted to be Gamma captain. But head of secondary at the time, Ms. Binny, hello if you're here, told me that, no, you should try applying for president. And so I said, hey, you know what? Why not? And guess what? I lost. I failed. And for a lot of people, that specific moment might become a crippling event moving forward because you think, hey, I put my name out there, everyone knew I was running for president, and then I wasn't selected. Wow, I feel like such a failure. But for me, it was a humbling lesson because I learned that even if I felt that I was the most qualified person for something, it doesn't necessarily mean that I am bound to get it. So guess what happened next? Year 11. Again, I was recommended to apply for student council president. And the same person that won the previous year was also running. Now, it was scary, and given some luck in the equation, since that person left the school, I actually ended up becoming president of student council. And I had no idea what that was supposed to mean. But I'm not sure if any of you here are old enough to remember this. Nearing 2013 was exactly the time that our school was also meant to shut down. So imagine being the president of the student council of a school that was not going to exist in a year or so. Where do I put that on my CV? But then that was the next challenge. Because for us, as a community, as the student council, as students, parents, and teachers, we wanted to have a say. And you need to remember that social media back in 2013 was not the same thing that it is now. But it was still just as powerful. And then that was my first experience trying to put out a message to the public through social media. We started #KeepTWS. It got trending. It was the #1 hashtag in the UAE for quite some time. It got us media coverage. There was television. There were newspapers. And I would like to believe, personally, that we played, as a student council and as the community of the school, a part in not allowing our school to shut down, which I'm thankful for since I'm here today. But that journey and those failures on the way were the only reason that I would even imagine taking up a challenge as big as that. Now, you need to remember that I'm just talking about the major ones. There were so many different failures on the way. I tried graphic design because I thought, why not? So I designed a bunch of newsletters, a bunch of posters, and guess what? They were all terrible. Until I designed my 50th, and it was actually pretty good. And then I designed a few more. And suddenly, I was the guy that was supposed to design the entire yearbook for that batch. Think about something else. Video production. I love storytelling, but I could never really tell a story aside from speaking on stage, because that was a skill I was developing on the side. But I wanted to tell stories in videos. And so I started making videos. And guess what? All of them were terrible. Until they were not. So the first video I made that was actually good enough made me feel like a success. And so I kept making videos. And I ended up having to make videos for every single event. It was kind of like the teacher's favorite thing to say. Like, oh, we have an event, go make a video. But it all stemmed from tiny failures on the way. Now, all of this led to the next step in my journey. University. Where I, for most of the time, slept. Because what you need to understand is, me, as this guy, I was all about practical learning, getting things done, trying, testing. I wasn't about books and sitting down. University. A big thing for some of you here. It's so far away for a lot of you here. You're not even thinking about it anymore. But for me, it was more about the fact that I understood myself. I had a sense of self-awareness, and that stemmed from everything that I did in school. I realized I liked storytelling. I realized that I loved engaging with people. I realized that social media was a big thing for me, that I was passionate about it. And so it didn't make sense for me to study biology. It didn't make sense for me to get into chemistry or physics. So I made the switch, and it wasn't that bad. But again, university came with its own failures. Just like high school, I did hundreds of things, applied to 100 competitions. Everything that came my way, every single opportunity, I went for. And not just because I was confident that I was going to win. Imagine this. You sitting right here. If I told you that in a few years, you were going to pitch at the United Nations for $1 million on an idea that you literally just came up with a few months ago, would you believe me? Exactly. So I didn't believe it. But I was like, hey, we got this far. Who knows? Maybe we win. And guess what? We lost. Imagine being 10 minutes away from making your startup $1 million in seed funding and losing. Imagine the heartbreak and coming back here from New York and feeling like, was this a waste of my time? Is this it? Are we done? But the fact was, it wasn't. During that period, I developed so many different skills. I learned so much more. But this is what you need to remember. It's a numbers game. Because for every 100 no's you get, you might get that one yes. And that one yes might change your life. Because we kept trying until we got our yes, which came in the form of the Expo Live program. And that helped us get the six-figure funding we needed to actually take our startup to the next step. Now, the most important part of this entire journey was the fact that throughout the journey itself, I started to develop a passion. Now, a lot of people came on stage today and talked about passion and what it means to them and how it's different and the way you perceive it. But for me, I think this is probably just the simplest definition of passion. It's just this barely controllable, strong emotion or an intense desire or enthusiasm that you have for something. Now, my question here to you is, if you don't try enough things, how do you find your something? If you don't try enough things, how do you develop a strong emotion towards any of them? Imagine if in grade 5, I said no to applying to be a class president. Imagine if I said no to presenting on stage. How would I even understand what any of this is? How would I even come to the conclusion that I have a passion for storytelling, that I have a passion for the business world, that I have a passion for impact and social entrepreneurship? I wouldn't. So again, it literally is a numbers game. And there's nothing wrong with failure. If you right now get out of here, start applying to literally every opportunity your way, I guarantee you, you will learn more about yourself than you did over the past few years. If you literally try everything, even the things you don't even understand, if you just give them a chance, I guarantee you, you will learn so much more about yourself. You will really start to understand what your passion is, what you're passionate about, what you're good at, and what you're bad at. And this whole thing is about self-awareness and your perception of failure. Because if you start thinking of failure as a hindrance, if you start thinking of failure as, oh, if I fail, I'll feel guilty or ashamed, or I can't talk to these people anymore, or I have to leave this group, or if you start thinking of failure that way, you will always hold yourself back. You will become your own enemy. And in a few years, you'll be doing a 9-to-5 job, or you might be in a startup, or you might be a family person, and you look back on the years, and the worst thing, believe me, the worst thing that you could possibly have is regret. Because even with everything that I did at high school and university, there are still so many regrets. there were still so many opportunities that I could have took up. There were still so many things I didn't try. There are still things I'm trying now and failing at right now. Literally the most random things. We just set up a TikTok account. Me and my best friend, just trying to understand the platform. We started a podcast, me and a few of my friends. There are so many things in the world for you to listen and pay attention to and try to understand and learn. And you're just holding yourself back because you're afraid of failure. The wand might give it away, but think about this quote. It's impossible to live without failing at something, unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default. Think about being so worried about failure that you end up failing. Think about being so consumed by the idea of failure that you end up wasting your life away doing something you're not passionate about with the excuse that, oh, I'll figure it out later. If you want to genuinely reach success in your life, this is the only way. You need to fail, you need to learn, and you need to repeat. Every time you fail, you learn a new lesson. And then you either continue venturing towards that, or you completely move away. But that process never ends, no matter where you're sitting today, no matter who you are in a few days, years, or decades. One of my favorite quotes of all time. Why do we fall? Only so we can learn to pick ourselves up. And for that reason, every single time anyone asks me, how'd you do this? How'd you do that? How'd you manage to accomplish this? How are you successful in this thing? How are you good at public speaking? How are you good at graphic design? How do you make good videos? It's literally the same answer. You need to fall early, you need to fall often, and you need to fall forward. Thank you.